Wait a minute. Let me just say, it's so apropos to begin a conversation about Wendell Berry with technical difficulties with electronic devices, right? Anybody agree with that? Amen? I'm so happy to have this conversation with you all, and I'm going to give most of the credit to the adult formation. What did you call it, Heidi? The Taft Temporary Adult Formation Task Force that's arranged for our forums for this fall, and they said, hey, Scott, why don't you do a class on Wendell Berry? Because they know I like Wendell Berry. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come to mind. So it's nice to be asked by your friends to do something that you might enjoy. Before we get started, I want to name one of the things we've been working on with regard to this forum is doing it in two places at once. So there are those of us in the room, and we have a few people on live stream at the same time. So here's our try for this week. We have a wireless mic, so if conversation is more conversational, Sam's going to jump up and bring that mic around. If we have some responses to some of the readings along the way that are one or two sentences, seriously, one or two that I can repeat, and there's a little bit of a quick response, we might try to navigate that. If it's less clumsy, we're just still learning all this, still in real time as to how to do this. And and those of you online know that we're doing the best we can to have a lively conversation and include you in it as well. So I wanted to begin today with a prayer from the Book of Common Prayer. This is one of our prayers for Rogation days. They don't get a lot of use these days, the Rogation Day prayers. We don't say rogation a lot, actually. But the liturgies of the church used to be very tied to the rhythms of nature, to the harvests. And there were prayers embedded throughout the year to acknowledge where we were with regard to the harvest. So this is one of the prayers in our prayer book right now for Rogation days. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, Lord of heaven and earth, we humbly pray that your gracious providence may give and preserve to our use the harvests of the land and of the seas, and may prosper all who labor to gather them, that we who are constantly receiving good things from your hand may always give you thanks. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. So there's a big word, big religious word with a lot of baggage in there, providence. And for some reason, it's only reading that prayer, thinking about Wendell Berry, that it really hit home that the root of providence is what? Provide. I often think of providence in religious terms as God arranging the details of history and divine providence working all. It's provide. A great deal of what we have in this life is simply provided us. It's not achieved, it's not secured for ourselves, and that's a nice way in, I think, to Wendell Berry's whole vision of what it means to be human and alive in the world. A quick introduction for those of you who might not know Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry was born in 1934 in Port Royal, Kentucky. That's about 50 miles northeast of Louisville. Near where he lives, near where his family has farmed since the early 19th century. He writes poetry and fiction and essays. He attended the University of Kentucky, where he met his wife, Tanya. They were married in 1957. He moved from there. He got a prestigious Wallace Stegner Fellowship. Folks in his class were Ken Kesey, One Floor of the Cuckoo's Nest, maybe, or Sometimes a Great Notion, which is one of my favorites, and Ernest J. Gaines, A Lesson Before Dying. But they were just in this small cohort of 6 or 7 people out there with Wallace Stegner. He went all around and got a teaching post at NYU, was a very successful writer in New York City, right where writers are supposed to be, and he decided he was going to accept a post back at the University of Kentucky. And it's said, he tells a story in one of his essays that one of his superiors at NYU, one of the profs, came to him to talk him out of it. It was his job to talk him out of it. And he said, "Young man, you can't go home again." Quoting Tom Wolfe, who also taught at NYU for many years. And this is what Wendell Berry said about that. He acknowledged, yes, I understand I can't be a child again and go back into a life I once inhabited. But after that, he said, I knew also that as the sentence was spoken to me, it bore a self-dramatizing sentimentality that was absurd. Home, the place, the countryside, was still there, still pretty much as I left it, and there was no reason I could not go back to it if I wanted to. And so he did. He and Tanya have lived on that farm for 55 years now. They bought it in 1965. In 1987, some of you Wendell Berry fans might have heard of him this way as well. He wrote an essay in Harper's called Why I Am Not Going to Buy a Personal Computer in 1987. He got a lot of blowback. He still hasn't bought a personal computer or a cell phone or even hooked up an answering machine to his landline. So this is one way that he feels like we have to arrange our lives to ground us in the local, ground us in where we are in place and time. Before I move on, another quote of his, or a sentiment of his I like, is that he says, one's patriotism should be stronger for one's county than for one's country. Your patriotism should be stronger for your county than for your country. That's radical. But he believes the relationships closest in are the ones we have to attend to with the fullness of ourselves. How much would be healed in our world right now if we didn't divide our close-in relationships based on what you or I think about what's going on in Washington, D.C. Seamus Heaney told him regarding that, Seamus Heaney once said, his grandfather used to say, never ask a man if he's from County Cork. If he is, you'll know it. If he's not, you'll embarrass him. Okay. So today, I thought for Advent it would be lovely to enter mostly through several of Wendell Berry's Sabbath poems. For years, he's called himself a foul-weather churchgoer, meaning if the weather's so foul that he can't walk in the woods, he'll go to church. But a regular Sabbath for him is being outside, doing his work and walking in his land, and then writing these Sabbath poems. And there are dozens and dozens of them that have been collected over the years. And so Advent being a time of waiting seemed like a nice time to step in by way of some Sabbath poems. Those aren't all that we'll do, but primarily. What I'd like us to do is we'll read a poem together. I'll say a few things. With regard to our live stream, if you've got a comment that's a sentence or a word or two, feel free to share that and I can speak it back for the folks online. If the Holy Spirit moves and you've really got to tell us something, let us know and Sam's going to bring you the microphone. Can we try that? So this will continue the introduction to Wendell Berry and who he is, and it's in one of his poems. This is Sabbath 1994, number 4. He says, I would not have been a poet except that I've been in love, alive in this mortal world, or an essayist except that I have been bewildered and afraid, or a storyteller had I not heard stories passing to me through the air, or a writer at all except I've been wakeful at night and words have come to me out of their deep caves, needing to be remembered. But on the days I am lucky or blessed, I'm silent. I go into the one body that two make in making marriage, that for all our trying, all our deaf and dumb of speech has no tongue. Or I give myself to gravity, light, and air, and am carried back to solitary work in fields and woods, where my hands rest upon a world unnamed, complete, unanswerable, and final as our daily bread and meat. The way of love leads all ways to life beyond words, silent and secret. To serve that triumph, I have done all the rest. Strange things in a way for a writer to write about. Everything he said has been in the service of what can't be said. Any observations, quick observations on the poem or thoughts on the poem? So part of the title that I chose for this, long before I knew what I was going to talk about, was Nativity, Incarnation, and the Givenness of Things. So I wanted us to start dwelling on Wendell Berry's insistence that most of our lives, the most important things we have simply been given to us. The fruitfulness of the earth, the world we were born into, they're not anything we've achieved or accumulated for ourselves or in control of, but have to be received. So to have a writer tell us who he is and how he understands his vocation by saying, everything I do and try and struggle for in my writing in all of these genres is ultimately faithful not to anything I've done, but stories that arrive to me, to simply being alive and in love. Being bewildered and afraid is what drove him to be an essayist, not knowing how things work in the world. Strikes me as a healthy way to enter this Advent season of waiting. A lot of times we see waiting and Advent and absence just purely in negative terms, in the same way that we probably see Sabbath itself as a lack of work. As if the important stuff, we need to have white space on our calendar so we'll be more productive for the other 6 days, Abraham Joshua Heschel, talked about the Sabbath, called it a palace in time. This is the culmination of what it means for humans to be alive in the world, is Sabbath, is this resting in the given world. I think Advent could possibly be a time to do that. And what would it be like if we could tie our vocation in the world to that? By vocation, I mean what you're called to do in the world. I don't mean what you get paid for. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But that deep part of yourself that you have to offer to the world, what if we grounded that first, not in my skills and my gifts and my qualifications, but in this sense of givenness, this deep sense that the most important things in our lives simply exist without our doing anything to arrange for their arrival. Yeah, Heidi.
I think I probably wasn't the only one who noticed that last word, and just it caught me and made me smile. To serve that triumph, I have done all the rest. And usually triumph is something that is achieved, and all the rest is all the other things. But to knowing that this is a Sabbath poem, that caught me at the end with a delight that I can't quite explain, but I just wanted to share.
Rest is something that he has done.
Yes.
Not the absence of something. Yeah, really well said. To serve that triumph, I have done all the rest. I've done all the resting. Yeah, I love that connection. Beautiful. Let's try another one. We've started to get to know him. I picked some of these out. For a guy who preaches from a text, these forums are tricky. So here's another Sabbath poem. This is from 1979, poem 10. Whatever is foreseen in joy must be lived out from day to day. Vision held open in the dark. By our 10,000 days of work, harvest will fill the barn. For that the hand must ache, the face must sweat. And yet no leaf or grain is filled by work of ours. The field is tilled and left to grace, that we may reap. Great work is done while we're asleep. When we work well, a Sabbath mood rests on our day and finds it good. So in this poem, the first he talked a little bit about his own vocation and how that might relate to a Sabbath mood, a Sabbath way of seeing things. And this one he ties together work and Sabbath a little more clearly, doesn't he? A little more directly. And something I love about this poem that we might talk about that brings us in Christian language is when we say work, in Christian terms, especially if you're a good Protestant, we start thinking about works righteousness, right? As opposed to grace. And how do we see our Christian lives in terms of grace and what is given that has nothing to do with merit, has nothing to do with what we've achieved? And when do we slip over into proving to the world that we're good or to God that we're good by what we do? Something in this poem, and especially its use of grace for the givenness of the world, in this balance of work speaks to this for me, and I wonder if anybody else can help us fill this out with an insight or two. This whole idea that our 10,000 days of work, he's not talking about an insignificant amount of work, and he's described his work on the tobacco farms of his childhood as the hardest physical work he's ever done. It simply required the whole body for so much of the day and for so much of the week. So he's not setting aside work as less important. By our 10,000 days of work, harvest will fill the barn. For that the hand must ache, the face must sweat, and yet, no leaf or grain is filled by work of ours. The field is tilled and left to grace, that we may reap great work is done while we're asleep. So I wonder in your life, whatever you spend your days doing, do you have practices, or have you seen practice, or do you wish you had practices that would hold a similar balance between the work that I do in the world and the sense that so much of our lives simply comes to us, whether it's the fruitfulness of a field or whatever else it is? Do you have practices? Yeah. Yeah, Dave. Yeah, Dave.
Sorry, at the risk of too much Rupke here.
Can't be too much Rupke.
Well, I immediately, I have a lot of thoughts, but that last question you asked, so I'm an astronomer, as maybe not everybody here knows, but astronomy is an observational science, and like you're just waiting all the time for light to reach you, and it's just, in some sense, all you're doing is watching. You have to get all your telescopes ready and, do your analysis and all this, but in the end, you're just waiting. So I'd never thought about that before, so that's in this context.
That's fantastic. Yeah. An astronomer's job is to wait for the light to reach her or him. You got Catherine back there and then Jill up here.
Oh, you said Catherine?
No, come on, she can come up. Go ahead, Jill. Go ahead, Jill. Oh. Well, whoever Sam gives it to will be next.
That's right. So I was just, before I came in, I was with the children reading the Christmas stories. And when I finished reading my story, one of them said, "Did you know there's just 6 more days till Christmas?" And I was filled with this sense of like, oh my gosh. Like, she was joyful about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. And this, like, my response of like, there's a lot to get ready for in my like home life and in my church life. And her just like, did you know it's coming? And she's ready to receive the, whatever that means for her. But that sense of like, toil, 10,000 days of work, whatever. But guess what? Christmas is coming. The Christ child is arriving. The story is unfolding regardless of whether the silver is polished here or at home, So that's what I was thinking about.
So if you were both astronomers, one of you would have been like, the light is coming. And there's the light. It's coming towards us. We're waiting on the light. Yeah, Jill.
Actually, a couple of lines in this second poem made me think about Fred's work. He puts the brackets on the teeth and the wire, but a lot of it happens while the patient's asleep.
Fred's an orthodontist, for those of you who don't know that. So.
You can hope that they move in a certain direction. But another thing that strikes me is that thematically, even though these poems are 25 years apart, they both have this nod to mystery. The words, have you ever seen an interview with a writer that didn't begin where you get your ideas from, right? Yeah. And Berry says, they come out of the air. They live in caves. They're in the ether. And I'm just the receiving station, and the process is a mystery.
Yeah.
In the same, 25 years ago, I'm not writing the same things I was writing 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know that I have that much of a consistent point of view, and I enjoy that.
But his point of view is still saying, I still don't know where they come from. And so there's a real, Sam, there's one back here. So that's that receptivity. And this again, feels very like a different way of thinking about Advent. Like, how do we move between not being Catherine, which we all are, and the child who sees the coming not as ominous and all the things I can't perform to, I can't live up to, but actually this grace coming into our lives. Like the farmer, it could be, here comes spring, I've got too many things, I only have some planting season's going to be over, or the earth is doing it again. The earth is doing it again. Yeah.
I've been interested in the process of creativity for a long time, and there are a number of studies about the so-called creative breakthrough that happens with artists and anybody involved in a creative undertaking. And one of the things they found out is that the creative breakthrough, you know, that light bulb that goes off sometimes, doesn't just happen. It always comes after a period of long, long work. Mm-hmm. And then, following that work, if you take a rest and do nothing, that's when it is most likely to happen.
Interesting. Interesting. So this is how clever that we've rediscovered what the first pages of the Bible told us is the way the universe is put together. Right, this is what Wendell Berry would say, and I think it's interesting. When I think of someone having a Christian worldview, a lot of times we think that means they hold certain ideas about Jesus in their head. Maybe you might have. Really, I think Wendell Berry would start with what you've described, this creative process, this balance in the earth that is the same process that is in our bodies, that is the same process in the minds of creative people, involves strain and work and the best of ourselves, putting it out into the world, and then rest. Fields lying fallow, just like the old Sabbath system. They had to every 7th year. They knew you got to let this field rest. So, thank you for that. Yeah.
Just one comment. Looking at this poem, the word God is nowhere there.
The word God is nowhere there?
God.
No, absolutely.
Matter of fact, what I like about it is he approaches this with God as a process, a creator that is moving with you, behind you in grace and love. And it's not an object that you worship, it's a life that you've been given. I like that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope in the process of listening to him that bifurcation or this dichotomy of God and grace being from the outside and what is natural and alive being over here, this separation, I think he's going to collapse that for us. And which is another way of what you're saying, Bill, is that the sacred is it's right here. It's happening right now. Aquinas used to say that, grace perfects nature. Grace isn't this other thing it's this power, not this like outside that's alien and foreign. It's like nature becomes more itself with these special infusions of grace rather than opposite. Look, great segue to one more, so y'all keep your thoughts coming. This is a little of his prose, and it's a story that I just love, and it'll take us a little further into the mystery of the givenness and the fruitfulness of the earth. Here's what he says. He says, "For many years, my walks have taken me down an old fence row in a wooded hollow on what was once my grandfather's farm. A battered galvanized bucket is hanging on a fence post near the head of the hollow, and I never go by it without stopping to look inside. For what is going on in that bucket is the most momentous thing I know, the greatest miracle that I have ever heard of. It is making earth. The old bucket's hung there through many autumns, and the leaves have fallen around it, and some have fallen into it. Rain and snow have fallen into it, and the fallen leaves have held the moisture and so have rotted. Nuts have fallen into it, or been carried into it by squirrels. Mice and squirrels have eaten the meat of the nuts and left the shells. They and other animals have left their droppings. Insects have flown into the bucket and died and decayed. Birds have scratched in it and left their droppings, or perhaps a feather or two. This is the slow work of growth and death, gravity and decay, which is the chief work of the world, has now produced in the bottom of the bucket several inches of black humus. Here's a slow, ordinary miracle. It's inexplicable. Science is getting more and more adept at breaking apart into little pieces and understanding more parts of this process, but he He walks by it with wonder. I think it's an example of what Bill was talking about. The thing that gets added pretty clearly here, though, is death, isn't it? It's really, really clear for someone who pays attention to a bucket that death is not alien to life. Death is not the absence of life. That death is actually deeply intertwined with life. It's the old prayer book, the right one committal said, "In the midst of life we are in death. Of whom may we seek for succor but of thee, O Lord?" We stopped saying that in 1970. I'm not usually a big one to say, let's go back to anything, but we stopped saying, in the midst of life we're in death. It's true. It's true. I wonder if that, does that ground you in any new way? Does that reframe how you think even about Christmas or life in general? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, Martha.
My comment's not about Christmas, but
Doesn't need to be about Christmas. Yeah.
well, my comment's not about Christmas, but I do have a garden, not a vegetable garden, but it is a teacher, and that whole thing about being close to death, I think at this time of life, for many of us who are kind of, consider us in the last quarter maybe, it's comforting to me to be in the dirt. I love working, because it's comforting. It's not work to me, because the resurrection or whatever things change and turn into, whatever arrives unexpectedly, deposited by a squirrel or, whatever, is just comforting. So this essay is comforting in that way. It's not the big bad grim reaper or something. It's just, it's an acknowledgement of being part of that cycle.
Yeah. I felt the same. I didn't know if everyone would feel that way uniformly. Oh, Pat, did you have one? Here you go, Sam.
I'd just like to add to that is that what she's saying is so true, because it's just where we just stop and realize it's not all about us.
It isn't, and it is. We're part of it all to the end. All the way. You're right. Not any individual. That's exactly right.
It's just not up to us all the way.
It's another word thing. It's this reminder that human and humus and humility all come from the same roots. Adam and Adamah, the earth and the human one in the first part of Genesis. This is, those two languages don't have the same family tree, and yet in both of those languages you have this tie of what it means to be human. In English also to be humble, to find this kind of humility that's not being humiliated. It's actually just finding our place among the things of the humus. We're part of these processes, and there's grace in that. Barry says there's grace in that. I wonder sometimes too when I listen to people who take Sabbath and the Sabbath nature of the creation in our lives seriously. Am I scurrying around trying to be productive and important to distract myself from the truth of death? I'm scared of it rather than having this context in which, no, this makes sense. I'm not rushing in. I don't want to be there a day early, whatever that means. But to feel like I have been received into the grace of God, received into the grace of things, is a great comfort to me. It's a great comfort to me. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. None of us is wasted. So the next poem, the Hebrew people believed in a Sabbath creation. Right? They believed in the Sabbath structure of things. It's interesting to me, and some of you have heard me talk about it before, that didn't just flow out into a personal growth program. Self-help wasn't really a thing. It grew up into an economic structure. Sabbath keeping the Sabbath nature of things meant that every 7th year the fields were to lie fallow. Every 7 groups of 7 years, debts were canceled, and actually land went back to the original owners as a way of noting that if we just let things go, a whole bunch of stuff's going to end up clumped over here in a few people's... They're interesting things, radical things. I don't think we can pick that up and drop it into our life today. But the principles, I think, are deeply true. And every time I return to that creation account and think, oh, they didn't know all the details, but they knew the basic ways things move. So it moved into an economic structure. So Wendell Berry is, I didn't even finish that. Did I finish that? Oh, well. Did you all read? I'm going to read the rest of them, we'll go on. I look into that bucket with fascination because I'm a farmer of sorts and an artist of sorts, and I recognize there an artistry and a farming far superior to mine or to that of any human. I've seen the same process at work in the tops of boulders in a forest, and it's been at work immemorially over most of the land surface of the world. All creatures die into it, and they live by it. Sorry about that. I've got two things going at once. So, this reality, in some places, has made its way into the formation of communities. Wendell Berry is very interested in Amish communities, and he has friends who are Amish. He's not Pollyanna about the realities of Amish life. These are also flawed human beings, and built into their systems are not all just sweetness and light and loveliness and balance. But he thinks they have something to offer. So this is from 1995. This poem actually has a title, Amish Economy. Maybe I should get this out so I don't stop it short. We live by mercy if we live. To that we have no fit reply, but working well and giving thanks, loving God, loving one another, to keep creation's neighborhood. And my friend David Klein told me, it falls strangely on Amish ears, this talk of how you find yourself. We Amish, after all, don't try to find ourselves. We try to lose ourselves, and thus are lost within the found world of sunlight and rain, where fields are green and then are ripe, and the people eat together by the charity of God, who is kind even to those who give no thanks. In morning light, men in dark clothes go out among the beasts and fields, lest the community be lost. Each day they must work out the bond between goods and their price. The garden, weeded by sweat, is flower bright. The wheat shocked in shorn fields, clover is growing where wheat grew. The crib is golden with the gathered corn. While in the world of the found selves, lost to the sunlit, rainy world, the motor-driven cannot stop. This is the world where value is abstract and preys on things, and things are changed to thoughts that have a price. Cost plus greed minus fear equals price. Maury Tallene thus laid it out. The need to balance greed and fear affords no stopping place, no rest, and need increases as we fail. But now, in summer dusk, a man whose hair and beard curl like spring ferns sits under the yard trees at rest, his smallest daughter in his lap. This is because he rose at dawn, cared for his own, helped his neighbors, worked much, spent little, kept his peace. What might an Amish economy have to offer lives like yours and mine? What might it expose? Community. Community is essential. He once tells a story, Wendell Berry once tells a story of walking and talking to an Amish neighbor all over the fence and looking at the field next door, and he says, in the next field, and he says, wouldn't you like to buy your neighbor's field? I bet if that goes up for sale. And he said, why would I want to do that? I've got all I can take care of right here. Plus, if I fall sick, my neighbor will be over here with his horses plowing my field. Same would happen the other way. If I bought his field, I'd lose a neighbor. Community is absolutely essential, and scale follows from that. What else? What would be, how do you calculate value? Or how does the world around us calculate value that we probably just don't even realize is happening all the time? What did his friend say? Cost plus greed minus fear equals price. Yeah, Nancy. Cost plus greed minus fear equals price. Interesting to think about how we decide what something's worth. Yeah, Nancy.
I think what's leaping out at me is keep it simple. And this of all times of the year, we don't keep it simple. I don't, and it's a constant struggle for me as I start pulling out a lifetime of Christmas ornaments and decorations, and I live in a very small place now. There is no way I can put all the little crash scenes out, even though, anyway, and it's, I need to get rid of it, but it's hard to let go of something that someone made for you and all of that. So I think the whole message, certainly with the Amish, is keep it simple. And in our day, we're just constantly bombarded. Well, you need this, you need that, you got to have that, and so that's what.
Yeah, that's helpful. Keep it simple. What would simplicity look like in our lives? He says elsewhere that we probably also have a wrong idea about the Amish relationship to technology. In a healthy Amish community, it's not reflexively no, more technologies. He said that Amish will have digital clocks in their buggies. But what they suggest is it is a legitimate question for the community to ask, what will this technology do to the community? That the community not only has the permission, but the obligation to ask that question. Now, we are fatalists when it comes to technology, aren't we, in our culture? It's just coming. It's just social media, it's horrible, but it's a thing. What are we going to do? We are struggling in a mighty way right now with the idea that we might to simplify our lives in ways that we think we need to maintain community and relationship and coherence in our lives. This is a foreign concept that we don't even know how to ask the question, really. And he's suggesting that the Amish may have something to teach us. Don't just say more technology is always bad, but ask the question, what will this do when it comes into my life? What will it do to my relationships? Yeah, Fred.
But it strikes me this cost plus greed minus fear is so human.
Yeah.
It's not quantitative at all. And the idea that these Amish that are somewhat, we look at them as you said, just holy or
you give it to him.
Or obvious or aware of it. But here they're making
Go ahead.
a price based on your greed. And you're balancing that with your own fear. I suppose the fear of not having to sell or something like that.
Here, take. So he's chasing you, Fred. But Fred's saying that these are very human emotions. Like wherever we are, greed, fear are things that humans simply struggle with. And we don't tend to involve those, we don't think about it explicitly as this is where our values end up, including the cost of things. We have like two separate definitions of value. Oh, I value you, I value abstract. Cost of things. Cost of things has value embedded. That calculation, including our human proclivities, our greed, our fear, and they've laid it out very clearly. Know this. What something is worth to you, including at the store, has all of yourself involved. So I appreciate you making that. Yeah, Jill.
I just noticed while you were reading out loud and reminding me that poetry is meant to be shared aloud. This section, the pace is so much faster, right? Just technically from the standpoint of putting this poem together, you've got that equation, you've got that mathematic equation there, and it kind of tumbles out, and then the last stanza takes a long breath.
But now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, so a poet will actually take us along in the way. I wasn't even thinking about it when I read it. I don't know, you probably heard it, and I didn't know I was doing that, but the poet will actually take us through. And the poet may not even be aware of that. That may be part of the grace of the creative process you were talking earlier. Yeah, is there another one? Oh, yeah, Bill.
What minus self equals love.
Compassion plus community minus self equals love. What would be solved if we could rearrange, if we could have a different formula? I like that one, and he only had about 3 minutes to think it up. Again, the idea, we're fatalists about economics. It just has to be this way. It just rolls on and it steamrolls up. But they would say, and he would say, these are not only just legitimate questions we can ask, they're our obligation to one another. We are obliged to ask these questions and see. Here's another from one of his essays. Because what I loved about the end of the Amish poem is it ends in that moment of grace, right? He has worked hard, tended to his relationships, and at the end of this day, his body's tired and his grandchild's on his knee. There's joy. There's joy. All of this talk of death and lack of freedom and like what's most important, it just comes to us. We're not trained to think this makes for a good life. We're trained to think that what makes for a good life is you've got a lot of agency and you get to go get what you want. It's not the ethos here. Joy is coming into the picture. So here's a piece I love from one of his first collections of essays. I sat one summer evening and watched a great blue heron make his descent, the top of a hill into the valley. He came down at a measured, deliberate pace, stately as always, like a dignitary going down a stair. And then, at a point I judged to be midway over the river, without at all varying his wing beat, he did a backward turn in the air, a loop-the-loop. It could only have been a gesture of pure exuberance, of joy, a speaking of his sense of the evening, the day's fulfillment, his descent homeward. He made just that one slow turn and then flew out of sight in the direction of the slough farther down in the bottom. The movement was incredibly beautiful, at once exultant and stately, a benediction on the evening and on the river and on me. It seemed so perfectly to confirm the presence of a free, non-human joy in the world, a joy I feel a great need to believe in. That I had the skeptic's impulse to doubt that I'd seen it. If I had, I thought it would be a sign of the presence of something heavenly on the earth. And then, one evening, a year later, I saw it again. Joy in the realm of the non-human. Joy in the realm of all that we've been talking about. We're not accustomed to speaking of that, are we? One more realm of the human experience we've been keeping to ourselves, assuming other creatures can't experience. Responses, thoughts on that one? Well, hold that. We're actually going to turn to one now that brings us right up to this season of the year, one of his Sabbath poems from 1987. Remembering that it happened once, we cannot turn away the thought as we go out cold to our barns toward the long night's end, that we ourselves are living in the world it happened in when it first happened, that we ourselves, opening a stall, a latch thrown open countless times before, might find them breathing there, foreknown, the child bedded in straw, the mother kneeling over him, the husband standing in belief, he scarcely can believe, in light that lights them from no source we see. An April morning's light, the air around them joyful as a choir. We stand with one hand on the door, looking into another world that is this world, the pale daylight coming just as before, our chores to do, the cattle all awake, our own frozen breath hanging in front of us, and we are here as we have never been before, sighted as not before, our place holy, although we knew it not. Now we're into the place of the Nativity we're about to celebrate, but thoughts about these connections he makes. What's the context? What's the setting? He's just headed out to the barn, right? Suddenly one cold morning, it's April, so that was confusing to me for a minute, but I assume that's because the spring calves are here. I don't know. But it's cold enough that they've got frozen breath. And I don't know if in Kentucky if your breath is frozen in April, but maybe some days. But anyway, the idea of coming to do these chores and all of a sudden realizing, wait a minute, it was in a barn maybe it's not just like this one, but it was on an ordinary morning in the world as ordinary people were going about their chores when the Holy Birth happened. And there are several references in here, not just to that too, right? What's the last line there? In front of, and we are here as we have never been before, sighted as not before, our place holy, although we knew it not. You know that echo? Who was that? Jacob. Jacob had wrestled with God and said, he stacked up some stones and said, I didn't realize this is the stair leading to God, and I didn't realize it. That moment of epiphany that we take from this season as well, of realizing the place I'm standing in is holy. Pat, yeah.
And I like what you just said, and for me, it doesn't have to be Christmas Eve.
Yes.
Whenever you have felt it, that is when it's come to you, and it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
The belief and the understanding and the lightness that comes with it is just unbelievable. And it doesn't have to be Christmas Eve for it to be there. Whenever
Absolutely.
you accept it, when you accept it is part of who you are and what you'll always be, it's just different. It is for me.
I love that. Maybe that's why he put April in there, to throw us astray. Remember, he's not retelling the Nativity. He's actually saying it's not just that story. It's you might wake up one morning and realize you're part of this story. And in that moment, you're going to want to take your shoes off because you're standing on holy ground, you know.
For me, it's probably not going to be Christmas Eve because like Catherine.
Fred says it's probably not going to be Christmas Eve because, like Catherine, we're scurrying around to get Christmas done, to achieve Christmas. Yeah, one more from Catherine. No, we're with you.
So the reading about the heron, and then I read ahead and read the Mary Carr poem already about the piano movers, which reminded me, those two, there's a Mark Doty poem called The Visitation about this whale that shows up and everybody thinks the worst is going to happen, and then it doesn't, so spoiler, it's wonderful. But it's about joy, and there's a line in it that says, what did you think joy was some small thing? And there's the piano being moved up the street and the whale and being compared to a big old fat leather couch and all of these things, like sometimes it's just cumbersome and large and awkward, and the heron, just the I don't know, the not fittingness of it all, like that it's just kind of crazy and unpredictably unwieldy sometimes, is what I'm appreciating this morning.
Yeah.
So that's
let's read the Mary Carr. So one of the things that Wendell Berry will always, a danger for me at least, is to really sentimentalize or to idealize a certain way of life and assume, like Pat was correcting us, to say that that's only going to happen if I go back to the land and show up in a barn. And I don't think that's actually faithful to Wendell Berry. He thinks there are specific things about being closely attuned to the natural world that are essential to being human, but it doesn't mean there's no such thing as cities. It should matter about how cities are built, but at the same time it shouldn't. So I wanted to end with a poem that wasn't his, that's one that I love, that I've used a time or two before. It's Mary Carr, called A Perfect Mess. Hopefully to cast our imagination and that same vision out into the city, since we happen to live in Memphis. She says, I read somewhere that if pedestrians didn't break traffic laws to cross Times Square whenever and by whatever means possible, the whole city would stop. It would stop. Cars would back up to Rhode Island in epic gridlock not even a cat could thread through. It's not law, but the sprawl of our separate wills that keeps us all flowing. Today, I loved the unprecedented gall of the piano movers, shoving a roped-up baby grand up 9th Avenue before a thunderstorm. They were a grim and hefty pair, cynical as any day laborers. They knew what was coming. The instrument white lacquered, the sky bulging black as a bad water balloon, and in one pinprick instant, it burst. A downpour like a fire hose. For a few heartbeats, the whole city stalled, paused, a heart thump. Then it all went staccato, and it was my pleasure to witness a not insignificant miracle. In one instant, every black umbrella in Hell's Kitchen opened on cue. Everyone still moving. It was a scene from an unwritten opera, the sails of some vast armada. And 4 old ladies interrupted their own slow progress to accompany the piano movers, each holding what might have once been lace parasols over the grunting men. I passed next the crowd of pastel ballerinas huddled under the corner awning in line for an open call, stork-limbed, ankles zigzagged with ribbon, a few passing a lit cigarette around. The city feeds on beauty, starves for it, breeds it. Coming home after midnight to my deserted block with its famously high subway rat count, I heard a tenor exhale pure longing down the brick canyons. The steaming moon opened its mouth to drink from on high. That feels more like Wendell Berry than I thought it did when I've loved that poem for years, but somehow being in these, that maybe right here in gritty Memphis streets, we can have these moments of grace opening up. If we see ourselves as something as part of something vast, including all the people just making their way through the streets, jaywalking, getting in our way, there's grace to be experienced. I once saw a preacher or a guy teaching, he said, he was taking his watch off at the beginning, and he says, "You know what this means?" Absolutely nothing. I'll leave you with this as you move into your Advent. This is, I think, from a poem he called How to Be a Poet. There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. Thank you all. Carry that with us into our Advent, and I wish you a blessed Advent and happy Christmas. Thanks.